Allora, parlerò di... ringrazio gli organizzatori per aver accettato l'abstract e sfortunatamente parlerò in inglese perché ho preparato la relazione in inglese. Quindi. The first instance of spontaneous symmetry breaking appears in its mature form with two papers by Yoshiro Nambu and our Italian physicist Giovanni Vasinio. These two communications are from 1661, the first 1661. And in these papers, I will try to really be very brief about it. What it is explained is that it's starting from a massless chiral invariant Dirac Hamiltonian. The mass results, in fact, any mass in the universe, that's a strong idea, results from spontaneous symmetry breaking, and thus it is a property of the ground state of such a Hamiltonian. You can imagine like magnetization in a ferromagnet, which is a property of the ground state, which is not written explicitly in the Hamiltonian. So there is no master of an Hamiltonian, but you can recreate it by means of this spontaneous symmetry breaking. Now, this phenomenon is also accompanied by collective excitations, which just shortly after will be called Boson bosons, which arise to restore the chiral symmetry, which was broken by the presence of the mass. Now, the relevance of this dynamical mechanism for the problems of the time is the fact that substantially chiral symmetry, which was discovered as a key to weak first and strong interactions also, is actually compatible with mass, or is rendered compatible with mass. As you might deduce from the titles of the papers, there is superconductivity. So the key to this discovery is an analogy with superconductivity, and between superconductivity and elementary particles. Now, how is that the key? I'm gonna just say a few words. Is the fact that the benefit of looking at a solid like a superconductor is the fact that the superconductor distinctively has one phase, which is the normal phase where the gauge symmetry is intact, another phase, a superconducting phase where the gauge symmetry is broken, and it's easy to switch between the two situations because we are solid, we just can warm up and cool down the solid. And such an operation, of course, is very difficult, impossible actually, when the solid is the universe. And that's where the advantage of having a system that simulates some of the aspects of the universe comes into place. I won't talk about this aspect of analogy, which is very interesting, but I would actually want to put the analogy in a wider context, and with that show you how this analogy is only the final leap in a wide conceptual network, which interweaves syncretically ideas and techniques that cut across different historical moments and disciplinary domains of physics, and includes independent streams of motivation, progresses, and problems that they are independent, so they sort of belong to different disciplines within physics. And the other thing is that actually how spontaneous symmetry breaking sits at the confluence of these streams, these independent streams, offering a single solution to these independently developed problems. Now, the aim, which of course transcends this whole project, is to provide a more faithful picture to the logic of discovery. So, you understand better as we go on. Now, this is the scheme that the conceptual network behind spontaneous symmetry breaking. Of course, I mean, don't be afraid. We're gonna just basically go through the main points, the main things of this diagram, so the content of the paper that I mentioned is just down here. So basically, this is the part of the two papers that I mentioned here, which through Gaudenzi's theorem, on the one hand, lead to the Higgs mechanism, which is very known, especially with the latest discovery. On the other branch, sort of leads back to ferromagnetism, crystallizations, and many other phenomena that are actually part of solid-state physics. So it's a radically different branch, and the same solid-state physics from which I will show you that the start, basically the inception of this concept is, where the beginning of the concept is. So you can see the first observation from this scheme is that it's a long feedback cycle. So starts on solid state, goes to superconductivity, I will tell you then better, weak interactions and so on, and then it goes back in a long feedback to solid state physics, back again. Now, let's see what are the color coding of this scheme that are there just in order to browse through. So, in green, you see the domain of low energy phenomena, so that's many-body solid state physics. In red, you see the QFT, QED, so quantum electrodynamic, quantum field theories part. In blue, the superconductivity line. In this light orange, the weak interactions. And in red are circled, this dashed line, the analogic steps of this network, which, as you see, they are interspersed throughout the whole network. So now, if you focus on the dates, you see that there is the earliest is that late 20s. So that is mainly basically the Arthur-Fock non-perturbative approximation method that was used to model complex atom and molecules. As you know, it was just a treatment, an approximate treatment of the Schrödinger equation, and was used to model atoms that are larger than hydrogen in a non-perturbative way. Now, it is interesting because, why? Because on the one hand, through a conceptual analogy, it's actually connected to the renormalization technique, so to QED, in terms of principle. So the same principle is abstracted by Tomonaga, especially, who states it explicitly, and in a certain way, as I say, conceptual analogy, the idea of the self-consistent subtraction method is taken by Tomonaga on one hand, and it also, on the other hand, inspires, basically, that same Arthur-Fock method was the one in which Nambu was interested, because he was, and that goes back to his first interest, because his initial objective, so Nambu's initial objective was, right there, modeling nuclei through many-body non-perturbative methods. So he was interested in this family of perturbative methods, which include also later on Bohm and Pines on 5051, and with Pines he has a correspondence actually, so it is known that basically is interested in those methods, and also the Thomas Fermi method, which has similar principles, non-perturbative ideas, the treatment of many-body low-energy systems. Now, so it is not a chance that then the recognition of an analogical structure between these three methods, Arthur-Fock, Bohm and Pines, and Thomas Fermi, leads Nambu and Kinoshita in 1954, and that's here, to the generalized Arthur-Fock non-perturbative treatment of many-body problems. Which is a paper that sort of, yeah, it's interesting, that it applies only to, still stays in the realm of low-energy phenomena, and I don't think it's actually that red, was that red. Now we pause here for a second, we move to the other three independent streams, in which Nambu actually didn't take much part. On the front of the weak interactions, the discovery of parity breaking, here, 1956, as you know. That's on the front of weak interaction, the discovery of the parity breaking motivated, on the one hand, this called VA theory of weak interactions, vector and axial vector theory of weak interactions by Feynman and Gell-Mann. The theory proposed that the weak particles interacted through an equal proportion of vector and axial vector coupling was successful and able to explain, among other things, the universality of the vector coupling. Now, by the way, this universality actually comes, if you read the papers, by a conceptual analogy with the charge in the universality of charge in quantum electrodynamics. So that's another analogy that contributes to the network. Now, the question was, can we also extend this analogy to axial vector coupling, which is the other coupling here? Well, that was kind of an open question at the end of the paper by Feynman and Gell-Mann, this one here. And so the question is, can we extend it by analogy? Well, here, substantially stops a little bit. So these in orange, by the way, are the problems, say that where the things stop for a while, and you can connect this to another thing, which is the Goldberger-Treiman relation, which is basically a relation that assumes universality of the axial vector coupling and derives, you might know, a relation between strong and weak forces. Okay. So now, the doubtful manner in which this relation was derived did not solve the problem of universality. It was substantially created a parallel problem, but there was a benefit though, and this benefit is different. It just transcends the single result. The fact was that the link between strong and weak forces provided by the relationship, which was coupled to the fact that this was a doubtful procedure, was attractive and spurred several physicists to derive the same relation from more solid premises, from a more solid framework. Actually, most of this attempt to rederive this relationship from a theory, a more solid theory or framework, actually were not really successful. Now, the other front in weak interactions has to do with the so-called two-component neutrino theory. It's Abdus Salam, 1956-57. And so the theory recognizes chiral invariance rather than parity, which is chirality is the product of charge conjugation and parity, as an important, fundamental symmetry in weak interactions, and revealed an incompatibility also at the same time between chiral invariance and mass. Namely, the mass breaks chiral invariance, or in other words, violates chiral conservation. So the presence of mass was disturbing then this whole two-component neutrino theory, which was working, of course, for the massless neutrino by then, but not working for massive particles. So there is sort of an incompatibility that stops somehow the development for a little bit. Now, there's another thread which is fairly different. It's somewhat more belonging to the low energy phenomenon, and this is superconductivity. So the milestone of superconductivity is the Bardeen-Cooper-Schrieffer theory, which explained a lot of the phenomena that were open in the superconducting business, and which was reformulated by Bogolyubov using Bogolyubov transformations, which actually came as a sort of an extension. So on perspective of Bogolyubov was an extension of the theoretical treatment of superfluid helium. So he extended the treatment to superfluid helium with the same transformation and that produced a reformulation of the superconductivity. Now, in this reformulation, what is particularly evident is an incompatibility again, which is parallel to this one. Of course, was not known by then, was not seen, but it's the fact that the presence of a superconducting gap breaks the gauge invariance, namely the ground state violates charge conservation. As we know, it's not a light incompatibility because it means that it meant that it didn't conserve electric charge, and of course the crucial premise of electromagnetism seemed to be violated by this brilliant theory that was reproducing many phenomena. Now, this fact again called quite some attention on the problem, and again solutions were proposed to solve this, but none of them was fully satisfying. And here now resurfaces again, as we see, especially his cross-disciplinary inclinations and previous work that he had done here turned out to be crucial. Now, first he proposed his own reformulation of Bogolyubov reformulation of superconductivity. So it's yet another reformulation. Now, this reformulation, what it does, it integrates the generalized Rutherford treatment that he had written a few years back, with the ideas and techniques from quantum electrodynamics. Now, there are some concepts here, word identities, self-energies, and so on, and there are just some ideas that are formal and more intuitive that are taken from quantum electrodynamics. Now, using especially, just to say one thing, the analogy between photon and phonons. Phonons are this collective excitation in in solids. The superconducting gap is modeled as self-energy, so as an electron self-energy. So let's say the perspective changes quite radically. And in a similar way, and here we are led to the key passage here, that the modified current operator, which again is something from QED that he proposes in superconductivity, implies the existence of collective excitations. Now, these are, let's say, the plasmons that nowadays, so they are a collective excitation of superconductor. Now, this automatically gives you, solves the fundamental problem of superconductivity. So, namely, it proposes, it just gives you a charge current that is conserved. So, charge is again conserved by considering the ground state and the collective excitation together, in a picture that says that gap, gauge invariance, and collective excitations are all logically connected. They are facets of the same phenomenon, which of course will be spontaneous symmetry breaking. Now, leveraging on the formal analogy between the charge current in a superconductor and the conservation of the carrier current, so namely this carrier current that was proposed by Goldberger and Treiman, but was not really explained. So leveraging on this analogy, the fact that you recognize a formal analogy, it can, on the one hand, explain the universality of the axial vector coupling, and on the other, of course, explain from this more solid framework the Goldberger-Treiman relationship. So, now, this same formula, this formula of conservation of carrier current, which was a result of analogy, also called basically for another analogy, and basically allows to recognize that between the gap, gauge invariance, the problem of superconductivity that was solved, there's a parallel problem, which is the fact that mass, relative invariance, and collective excitation perhaps are logically connected. So through this analogy, which was derived by another analogy, he manages to map these two problems on completely different physical systems. That leads to then spontaneous symmetry breaking as we know it more or less nowadays. So the open problems here was solved, and okay, yes. And this actually leads me to the conclusion. So this is Nambu's path. Just at a glimpse, you see that it's a transversal path that sort of goes through the three different disciplinary streams that were open with the relative problems, and this starts from his own interest and re-elaboration of methods from the late 20s that belong to solid-state physics. So low energy phenomena, that's important to say that this is the low energy, this is also low energy, and here we are going to the high energy physics. So this leads me to the conclusions. We have put the analogy at the root of spontaneous symmetry breaking in a wider context. The analogy is not, I hope to have shown you, the analogy is not an isolated illumination, but the final bit of a network of ideas and techniques that cut across different phases and domains of physics. And that this network features other interspersed major and minor guiding and actually misguiding. I haven't talked much about this, but there are also misguiding analogies with shaded characteristics, with various characteristics and functions that are, for example, this analogy can be between problems or solutions. So they're not only between either solution or problem, they are extensions or generalization. They can be more formal or more conceptual. So looser, let's say looser, here more conceptual, or more stricter, so more one-to-one. And what emerges from this, I hope, is that an intra and cross-theory scientific dynamics where the process of puzzle generation and solution, this creation of problems and solutions, forms an inextricable continuum with the reformulation and re-elaboration of the theoretical tools. Now, there is more of a kind of an outlook, which is, so it's a conclusion and outlook. Of course, it's more than what I've shown, that this is taking as the unit of analysis this long durée, it's relatively long durée, let's say it's not as long, but it's relatively long durée, and technically detailed network that leads to a discovery, can complement, or if you are less generous and charitable, challenge classical historical philosophical accounts of the scientific dynamics, and the second point, I think, be the starting point to view scientific creativity as a sort of a bricolage, an activity that repurposes and readapts available tools to new problems. Thank you very much.
It's time for a couple of questions. The first is mine, and I want to know if your wonderful maps are available.
I can send it, yeah, definitely. I would be glad to send it.
So the second is connected. How did you create that map? I mean, what's the methodology for creating that map?
So
did you start from NAMBO and the references he made for its historical path?
Yeah, so it actually was rather a mixed methodology. On the one hand, when I went in November, I went to the NAMBO archives, and really I tried to cover basically everything that was there. It was a lot of material. So on the one hand, it's a personal level of NAMBO, from which, for example, I knew that he had letters exchanged letters with David Pines, so he was interested in these mechanisms for treating many-body solid-state systems. And other things are actually the thorough study of papers, I must say. So let's say that the two main sources are this, the archive and papers. And the papers, I must say, really were helpful to draw substantially. For example, here there are many other actors like Feynman and German, and this actually is a study of papers, and the thorough study allows you to see where the conceptual analogies are. For example, this one is also a study of the paper of Tomonaga, so you go through the different papers, you see that he had treated already many body systems, and he says that perhaps RT-FOC can be used for renormalization. That's what he does in a successive paper. So it's kind of and here Bogolyubov also, it's really like mostly a mix of, I would say I haven't really, I set a line with NAMBO's life. That was the main line, in fact, and from there I went to the different branches and went a little bit deeper in each of them. That's kind of what I can say, yeah.
Okay, I think you are proving your statement. It's bricolage.
Yes, absolutely bricolage, yes.
Okay, thank you.